What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So our first story of today is a bit complex, but we'll cover all of it. So essentially, Anthropic had a announcement this morning, or someone caught it, that they updated their terms that basically said, as you can see here in the quoted tweet, using OAuth tokens obtained through Claude free, pro, or max accounts in any other product, tool, or service, including the agent SDK, is not permitted. But then we have Tariq here, I think is how you say his name. He is an engineer at Anthropic working on Claude code. And he basically came out and said, this was a docs cleanup we rolled out that caused some confusion. Nothing is changing about how you can use the agent SDK and max subscriptions. And then everyone in the replies is still asking the main question that everyone's wondering is, can you still use Claude Code Max for OpenClaw? And personally, I'm just going to use it until I get banned, and if I get banned, then I just won't renew with Claude. But I definitely am still using it for my OpenClaw, and I'm not going to pay for the API access for the token because it's just so much more expensive, than the $200 max plan. But it hasn't been fully cleared up yet. Everyone's asking about it. It's a huge drama for today, and we'll have to see where they go with it. I don't think anyone's been banned quite yet. I saw one person got banned on Claude Code, but it wasn't clear if it was just because they were using their Claude Code with OpenClaw or not. But definitely something to keep an eye on. And it's so interesting how much Anthropic is building so much bad will with the developer community, but whoever has the best model wins at the end of the day, so we'll just have to see moving forward. Next, we just have a quick tweet from Dax talking about kind of the business models of these AI businesses moving forward and these big foundational labs, as well as the application layers built on top of it. So he's saying, we want tokens to be as cheap as possible. It should be a terrible low margin business that is only worth doing at huge scale like electricity. This won't just happen. It'll be a tough fight for people working on the application layer to keep the inference companies in their zone. So very interesting. I don't know exactly what that means, that it'll be a tough fight, like what they're actually doing, if they're just arguing for better inference costs and making sure that they don't have high margin. There is someone in the reply saying, it costs $2 billion to develop a frontier model that lasts 2 months. They have to recoup the cost somehow. And Dax replies saying business isn't about what's fair to one party. If you look at the history of things that eventually become commodified, it often started with a big investment. So it's definitely an infrastructure piece. It's kind of like the new AWS per se, you could say, where it's they're providing the infrastructure, but the real companies are going to be built on top of it, and they'll just be making the margin. I think the AWS margin is quite a bit higher than what the token margin is for inference, just because it's so expensive to run inference on these big models. But just cool to see people talking about it, and we'll have to see where we go with this industry. But definitely, it just seems like the infrastructure always gets commoditized down to the lowest level, and also people in the future will probably be using different models for different things and trying to reduce costs while optimizing for performance. And also, I think the Anthropic team and I think ChatGPT and also OpenAI said that they're going to be able to reduce costs by 10x, I believe, for the same level of performance within the next year. So that's always great to hear as well. Okay, next we have a tweet from Mikey C, who seems to be an engineer at Convex, or at least working there in some capacity. And he tweeted out this cool package, which is the first time I'm hearing about it, called Confect. And essentially it's Effect TS meets Convex. So you can basically use Effect to define your schema. I believe you can also use it to define your mutations and queries. And Effect is basically a more deterministic version of TypeScript, it seems, where it's you kind of pipe things. It's more functional maybe as well. I haven't had too much experience with it, but I know it's very hype. Could be something very interesting to look into. And this package essentially helps you use Effect to define your convex schema, and I think you can do your mutations, etc. And it's pretty cool, for building the next level of TypeScript applications. So I'm definitely gonna try to check it out when I get a chance, or at least just have AI explain it to me and what the differences are, and maybe look into a migration possibly. But at the very least, if you just get on Convex, you're still gonna get all of the real-time benefits and all the transactional benefits. Those are the main pieces that I recommend Convex for highly. But Effect TS is definitely very hype, and I know Theo was a big fan of it, and all of those really big TypeScript guys really like Effect TS. So definitely something to check out, especially if you're using them both together right now. Okay, next we have a cool paper coming out from OpenAI. I didn't get a chance to read the paper. They also have a smaller blog that you can actually listen to, and I think they said it's about 6 minutes, where they kind of go through this EVM bench that they figured out. But essentially what it is it's a new benchmark that measures how well AI agents can detect, exploit, and patch high-severity smart contract vulnerabilities. And in the list, they work with a few companies. I think one was called Paradigm, which seems to be a crypto research company. And there was one more that started with a T. I can't remember their name, but if you check out the blog, you can definitely find out. And it's pretty cool because, smart contracts are the highest risk form of software, right? Where it's once it's deployed on the chain, if you have a vulnerability, people can just drain the entire wallet. If you've been around crypto for any period of time, you know that all the time, millions of dollars are getting drained from different wallets because of different vulnerabilities that are basically irreversible because of the blockchain. So definitely some cool stuff coming out here from the AI world, and how can we utilize LLMs to solve these security problems and make sure that all of our software is best practice and reliable and secure moving forward. And they have a whole paper on it, and I think they cover 120 vulnerabilities is what they said they're looking after. And I guess in the replies they said that's not even that much. So I don't know where the full documentation of all the smart contract best practices, and if they change in Ethereum versus Solana, or how you have to handle those things. I'm not too big into crypto development, but very cool release from them. And always awesome to see kind of the industry being pushed forward to like more security and more safety. Okay, next we have a pretty cool release from Cursor as well today. This is from Michael Truell, who is the CEO and founder, and he says you can now easily give Cursor access to your knowledge bases, deployment environments, observability suite, internal tools and design files, ask it to figure out an error by scanning through Datadog, hunt down runbooks in Notion, deploy to AWS, or replicate a mock from Figma. And he says much of this was possible before. I presume he means like through MCP is probably how this was done before, but now they kind of have this UI built into Cursor where you can essentially add these plugins and install them and then utilize them for whatever you're trying to work on. And I guess it still probably uses MCP servers behind the scenes is what it seems like from this demo, but still pretty cool to like build these marketplaces in. And that is like the main piece of AI, right? Is like what context you can give it is what makes it powerful. So this is definitely a really cool feature set. And it's interesting to see like bouncing around on these different IDEs. I still use Cursor just for file viewing. I don't use it for any AI. I use Claude Code for all the AI stuff. But if I get banned for my OpenClaw, then I'll probably have to, move to Codex or Cursor. But there's still no clear winner in the IDE wars for AI-driven development. But all of these like little quality of life updates definitely make a big difference, especially for developers who want to just be as efficient as possible and, have as much convenience as possible as well. Okay, next we have a sick announcement from Aiden Bai. This guy is really like the best to do it in React. He's kind of like the new like Kent C. Dodds in a way. It's really hard to stop this guy from excelling. So essentially he ran this company. He's run a bunch of companies, but what I know him for is Million.js, which was essentially the first version of like React performance. And then he also had React Scan, which would look at your website and it would tell you if you're re-rendering multiple times, which they used to fix GitHub and like optimize it a lot, especially like the PR reviewer, I believe it was, had like a ton of re-renders that were really trash. But essentially recently they launched this new product called React Doctor, which you can use to scan your React code bases for anti-patterns, unnecessary use effects, etc. And you can see here, like it shows you all the errors. And they built a leaderboard for a bunch of popular open source projects to show like how well they're doing. Very interesting to see that none of them, even like TL Draw, which is like notorious for having like amazing developers, is only at 84 out of 100. So it would be interesting to see like how quickly they can get that up to 100. And I did check out the leaderboard recently and it didn't change that much. Maybe they're not the easiest fixes in the world, might be some refactors, but definitely sick. Like the idea of like, just drive your LLM to get your project to 100% on React Doctor, and you'll probably have a very performant application, Okay, next we have an announcement from PlanetScale that they're launching their database skills for AI agents, and you can give your agents the context they need to make good decisions and write better queries when working with Postgres, MySQL, Vitess, and Netkey. Coming soon. Netkey is essentially Vitess before Postgres. And my guess, and just from looking really quickly, it seems that they support, basic things like schema design and indexing and all of these different pieces. It's very cool to see like skills kind of as a platform still being developed, still being invested in. I think they kind of had like their 1 week of hype and then they died down a little bit. But in terms of like providing context, they're still quite good. Obviously, we have to keep in mind the Vercel study that they did that showed that just putting the context in AgentsMD was much more effective than actually relying on the LLMs to know when to fetch certain skills. So we'll still have to keep that in mind and like, I guess, using AgentsMD to like really specify when to call certain skills. But nonetheless, if you're working on databases, PlanetScale is like the best to do it in terms of like database design and scalability and performance and reliability. So these skills I'm sure would be very helpful. Okay, and then next we have a new launch, I guess, in TanStack Start, which is essentially TanStack. If you know about them, they did like TanStack Router, also React Query. They kind of took over as well, now called TanStack Query, I believe. And TanStack Start is basically their full library, kind of similar to Next.js. They're launching like full service websites. And they have a new launch, which is a good idea, obviously, which is that you can stop server-only code from leaking into the client and client-only code from leaking into the server, traces the full import chain and provides fixes and suggestions. My kind of solution now to this is like, I definitely make sure that files aren't exporting more than they need to. So if you have like a constant inside of a server file that has a ton of stuff, I make sure not to export it from there. I do think with tree shaking, it might actually be able to still like get rid of the code that's not needed for the export. But in terms of like mental model at the very least, I do like isolating these constants or these functions that get exported and are shared between client and servers, just so that that code specifically is only necessary in the place that it's used. But things can slip in, and like that's where like linting and possibly whatever they're working on here is very important. And you don't want to expose server code to the client. Obviously, even like environment variables, I know with like T3 env, you have to build in a specific way so you don't expose the names of your environment variables to the client. So just as much security as you can get, the better. So pretty cool if you're working on TanStack Start. I'm still pretty much on the Next.js wave or on the Expo web wave for multi-full stack. I haven't fully built something that does Expo mobile and Expo web, but I do think that's the future because you kind of have a solo code base. But if you're building like a web-specific web app, then TanStack Start is definitely a big competitor with Next.js. And I believe T3 Chat is actually using it. So that's a huge client, that you can kind of take inspiration from. Next, we just have a quick tweet from this guy, Yoav Codes, who's talking about his project Electrobun. And essentially what it is like he says here, you can build ultra fast, tiny cross-platform apps with TypeScript. So it's essentially like Electron, but on top of Bun. And it seems to also use like the device specific browser. So it seems like on Mac, it's using Safari. I saw a few tweets, I think from Dax as well, saying that like Safari is horrible and they just need to change it to use Chrome only. And I think even with Electrobun, there's a way to like exclude Chrome entirely, which maybe is the device specific browsers. But I did see a lot of people saying that like the Safari version of it was not very good and Safari just has a ton of bugs. Kind of a common thing, like they don't give you like a lot of CSS defaults and stuff like that, which Chrome does. So it's very good to test websites on Safari before launching them because iOS, even with the Chrome browser, is using Safari under the hood. But nonetheless, if you're looking into making a desktop app, this is kind of like the new competitor for Tori, but it's 100% TypeScript. So that's really sick. Okay, next we have a tweet from this person. I don't know what they do. I guess they're a pen tester turned security engineer turned meeting canceller, which is pretty funny. But they just have this tweet about OpenClaw, kind of a discussion that I thought was fascinating. Whereas OpenClaw, I guess on February 15, had 822 commits. From Pete, I believe, is the main contributor. I don't think many people are doing that many commits besides him. So we just have this tweet that says, like, this is absolutely risky and non-sustainable. Compromise/backdoor on this would be devastating. Impossible to keep track of 800 commits per day. You're abandoning control and grasp over the product. I think this is fascinating. I'm definitely curious to hear what people think, but I'm definitely on more of this side of the spectrum than on Pete's side of the spectrum. Obviously, OpenClaw got acquired by OpenAI, so he's the one who's winning at the end of the day. And it is used in production by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, would be my guess, because I think it has like 150,000 stars on GitHub, for example. But definitely I agree. Like, I really believe in the age of AI. It actually makes a lot more sense to have a full mental model of the code. And I've heard people looking at the OpenClaw code say it's really messy and really bad, but it does work. So there is something to that, and like vibe coding and committing this many times and just trying to fix every single bug you see immediately, as opposed to going through like some project management platform. So yeah, I'm still kind of figuring out what my philosophy with this is, but I'm definitely like moving away from vibe coding more towards like using AI to drive the code, and then me really like reviewing it thoughtfully and understanding the architecture, understanding the data model, and making sure things are straight and like aligned, and then, you know, updating the Claude MD or whatever as needed. But we're definitely headed toward an interesting future where we'll kind of have these separate divides, but no one can say that OpenClaw isn't production software. So it's not like you can bash it and say it's a toy that no one's using because it has, you know, 150,000 stars and millions of users would be my guess. And then next, similar to the story we covered earlier with PlanetScale launching their database skills, they also have this new blog called PlanetScale Postgres Operations Philosophy. It's pretty similar. It talks about like indexing and foreign keys and just kind of how to set up your database, how to monitor it. They also have like pooling and different best practices. So if you're using Postgres, definitely something cool to check out. They are like the best at the game to do it. They took Vitess, which was like Google's version or YouTube's version of infinitely scalable MySQL. They built their own platform called Neki, which is essentially infinite scale Postgres. And PlanetScale, you know, if you look at their benchmarks, are like one of the most performant databases that you can use. I think also for like a decent cost once you're at like scale where it matters, because they don't have a free tier anymore. But yeah, just a cool blog, something to check out if you're interested in Postgres, and maybe you could learn something. And then last, we just have a quick tweet from Pliny. I know people love this like jailbreaking LLMs and especially like the big models and stuff. We talked about this previous repo that came out called Heretic, where it was taking like all the open source models and just completely decensoring them, so they would generate, you know, the craziest stuff you could ask for, like drugs or weapons, etc., and like how to bypass even like law enforcement and all that. So you can see here Pliny figured out how to pwn XAI Grok 4.2. I don't know when this model got released exactly, but you can see here they actually gave the prompt, which they didn't do with Opus 4.6, I believe. And you can just kind of see here, if you check out the pictures, it has like WAP, the whole song playing with a bunch of curse words, which I guess is the jailbreak. And then here on the left, they have how to synthesize MDMA. So that's crazy as well. And that's like the whole thing, which definitely would have been censored. And it's just really cool. Like, I know with the XAI stuff with Grok, because it uses Twitter, like I think Pliny's actually been like seeding some of these like headers and stuff to really like train it ahead of time. I think it did it with one of the previous jailbreaks it did on Grok. So definitely very advanced stuff happening. And Pliny's obviously the best so far, like the most famous jailbreaker or pen tester for these LLMs. But if you're into this stuff, definitely cool to check out and, you know, experiment yourself and see what you can get Grok to generate. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.